Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation here on the Tattooed Historians YouTube page. I almost said another page. I'm all over the place. I don't even know where I'm at tonight. I hope everyone's doing well. Happy New Year to everyone. If we haven't chatted since the last time I was on, I hope everyone's having a fantastic New Year. Hopefully, it's already started out greater than 2022. Tonight, we are doing a top 3 U.S. Coast Guard stories. You've enjoyed the top 3 stuff. People have been enjoying getting into the chat and voting in chat on the best list. And I know that tonight you're going to learn a thing or two probably about the Coast Guard history because it's too often overlooked. And who better to have on for Coast Guard history than my good friend and member of the Coast Guard, Kendrick Gibbs. What is going on, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you, John?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm jealous of the weather you have out on the West Coast, and
Yeah.
we were talking offline about the food too. So yeah,
Yeah, and the fact that it's still a little light out right now. Sure,
yeah,
it's dark in
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
that's a little bit different. We've been dark here for 3 hours, and yeah, a little over 3 hours, and so yeah, it is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But how has the transition been for you? Because you're a PA guy like me. How's the transition to the West Coast been?
So I've never been further west than the state of Missouri, and that was back in 1996. But yeah, for me, it's even though since we drove out here, it really wasn't that big of an adjustment for the time change because we did it gradually. Going from it took us like 3 or 4 days to drive out here. So by the time we got out here, we were already tired to begin with. So it really wasn't hard to adjust to the time change. But it's been an adjustment for like culture wise, because honestly, I felt like we were in another country out here. It's totally the West Coast, East Coast thing.
Yeah.
It's like North and South Jersey or Eastern and Western Pennsylvania, but times 5. Because you're traveling 3,000 miles and stuff like that. So yeah, it's other than the weather, it's like the people. A lot of people out here are nice. We hear Southern hospitality. Let me tell you, the West Coast, they are some of the nicest people I've met. Deal with some crazy people, but a lot of really nice and welcoming folks. We were welcomed from day one that we got out here from people that live next door to us. I met almost all my neighbors, which I never did in Virginia.
Wow. Yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah, I still don't know all my neighbors here. So, and a lot of people just go and do their own thing and don't talk. So it's like, okay, that's fine. Maybe it's an East Coast thing. I'm not sure. But Kendrick, before we get underway with our top 3 stories, I do want to ask you a question about your time so far with the Coast Guard. But I really want to ask about why you came about this decision later, quote unquote, later in life, where it was like you went and you did the things with the history field stuff, but then you made this transition to the U.S. Coast Guard. And I would love for you to be able to point that out for some people and underscore that for some of our viewers.
So I will preface by saying my dad is a retired Coastie. He did 23 years. So when I was born, he had already been in almost about a dozen years at that point, roughly. And then he retired when I was 11. So like the first part of my life, I only knew the Coast Guard. And going into high school was like, I want to do this. And, then my mom was like, well, don't be like your dad, go get a college degree first. So I was like, so that's the first turning point. Like I go and get a college degree. So there's 4 years where I spend in college, and then I ended up getting my master's, and then life just took a different turn. And then COVID happened. I was already thinking about making a change out of the history field because I needed to provide more for my family. And, a couple things happened here and there. And then 2 years later, I end up raising my right hand and enlisting. And my wife helped me make that decision. She wanted me to follow that dream. So here I am, joined in April, but I've studied Coast Guard history as long as I've studied history, as long as I've been doing history myself. I've always had a lens for the Coast Guard. And especially like learning about the different world wars and things like that and Civil War. I always learn about what everybody else wants to learn about, but then at the same time, like, oh, well, what's the Coast Guard doing at this point? How are they involved in some of these major conflicts where you usually don't hear the Coast Guard's name,
right,
or the Army or the Marines or the Navy.
right.
So,
Right.
yeah, and so I've always been interested, and when you were doing this top 3 thing, I'm like, let's get the Coast Guard stories out there, because there's going to be some stories that people know about. There's going to be, and neither of us are talking about those. I think we both probably had that same mindset where we're going to talk about stories where we're going to have the idea of, let's go after something that not everybody might have heard about.
Right.
So, and I think we did a good job coming up with a great list of things. And there's more to it than just what we named, for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's just personal opinions.
Right.
Not a, this is it,
Yeah, this is not the definitive lists of top 3 stories. These are all opinion based, just like every other top 3 we've done. Yeah. But I dare say a lot of people think of the Coast Guard today and they revert to what they've seen in popular media, and being like, the crab fisherman stuff, and when we see a disaster happen, we go there with our ideas. But this longevity of this long history that we're going to cross tonight underscores so much more than just that initial thought, which I think is fantastic.
Yes. I think we're gonna step a little bit outside of the life-saving part of the Coast Guard. There's gonna be some of that mixed in, but we're looking more almost at the end of this, you're gonna see the Coast Guard more as a military service than just a life-saving service, I think, because a lot of this goes into some of the skills of a good military tactician, and in the face of adversity, Coast Guard's small. We know that. So it's a good list. I'm excited for everybody to share that, or I'm excited to share that with everybody, and everybody to learn something by the end of the night.
Yes, and full transparency here with everybody watching. Kendrick and I did share our lists with each other. Number one, it helped us to keep things straight with this and make sure that we have 6 good stories for you tonight. Number two, it allowed me to input it into the system quicker, so I don't have to type the entire time that we're live tonight, which is going to help me a great deal. I just hope that I put them in the right order. But we're going to find out, because we're going to go into Kendrick's number 3 pick. And remember, everybody, we're going 3, 2, 1, one at a time, and you're going to get to vote for which ones you like the best as we go through. So we're going to go 3, and Kendrick's going to give his. I'm going to give mine. We're going to take a little break. There's always a lull. And then you can vote in the chat for that. And then we'll go to number 2, and we'll keep progressing. So, Kendrick, let's start out with your number 3 of your top 3 Coast Guard stories.
Okay. John, you might have to remind me. I can't remember what order I put mine in.
Yeah. Well, I have it pulled up, so I can put it up on the screen so you know.
That's fine.
All right.
Go ahead and do that.
All right, Kendrick.
I don't want to be wrong and because sometimes I might change my mind of what I think is 3, 2, 1.
You're gonna make me do more typing. Kendrick's number 3 pick, ladies and gentlemen. There you go, Kendrick.
Okay. I would have been right.
There you go.
All right. So, War of 1812. We're looking at 1813 here. And I learned about this story when I got to Coast Guard Training Center, Yorktown, for Bosun Mate A School. I went down to the pier and saw a Virginia historic marker. One of those people where I break for historic markers. I just happened to stop on my walk and read it. And it was about the revenue cutter surveyor and the HMS Narcissus. And I had never heard this story before. But when I heard about it, I'm like, this is BA, and I was like, this is a really cool story. And I'm like, this just is another example of Coast Guard tenacity. The littlest service being that David and Goliath style thing here. So you're thinking about HMS Narcissus. We're talking the British Royal Navy, Napoleonic era. They're the best. They're the best Navy in the world at that point. And you're looking at the Revenue Cutter Surveyor. This thing is tiny. It's a small cutter. Cutters today are 65 feet or more. This cutter was, if I remember correctly, it's like 60 feet, under 60 feet. It's extremely tiny. But I'm going to pull something up here. So the Surveyor was in the York River, which is one of the tributaries into the Chesapeake Bay. And it had a crew of 15 men, extremely tiny. The HMS Narcissus is a frigate. It's armed to the bill with Navy sailors and Royal Marines, with the intentions of 68 feet is the cutter, extremely tiny. We're talking about a very much larger 32 gun frigate that the HMS Narcissus is. I believe that there were six pound cannon on the Surveyor. So put that in perspective, a 65 foot or 68 foot cutter with 6 cannons going up against a 32 gun British Royal Navy frigate. So about midnight in the evening of June 12th, 1813, there were barges carrying a party of over 50 British officers and men from the frigate Narcissus. They managed to close within 150 yards of the cutter before a picket boat, kind of like picket guard duty for the Army, was spotted this party, and they fired a warning shot. The British navigated their barges away from the Surveyor, but eventually they're going to come and attack and try to overthrow the cutter. So the Surveyor's crew, they had about 18. They fought stubbornly. It was hand-to-hand fighting. They killed 3 attackers, wounding about 7 more. Each man on the cutter had 2 rifles. And the officers that were on board, this was captained by Captain Samuel Travis. They had I think the fight only lasted less than an hour. But the lieutenant in charge of the attacking flotilla eventually returned Captain Travis's sword the next day. And this is what really said to me, this is an incredible story. I mean, not only were these men well outnumbered, they did get beat. Yeah, okay. No surprise there. But the surprise was how the British Royal Navy reacted to the situation. And I'm going to read what this letter was given back with the sword. It says, "Your gallant and desperate attempt to defend your vessel against more than double your number excited such admiration on the part of your opponents as I have seldom witnessed, and induced me to return you the sword you had so ably used. I am at a loss which to admire most, the previous arrangement on board the Surveyor, or the determined manner in which her deck was disputed inch by inch." So eventually the cutter was captured by the British. We don't know what the fate of the cutter was. It was used by the British fleet for a while. They were prisoners on the HMS. Captain Travis and his crew were prisoners on the HMS Junon. They eventually were sent to a prisoner of war camp in Halifax. And then Captain Travis would fare better because he was an officer, and he would eventually be paroled in Washington, North Carolina, on August 7th. And then he returned back to Virginia. Now, here's an interesting piece of history here for those of you that go to Yorktown. There is a Travis House in Yorktown that was once owned by Captain Samuel Travis and previously before him, his father. I have something that has, here we go. This was taken, maybe I can't read it all. I can't remember what this was taken out of, but so he lived there for only a couple of years in the 1820s. He died pretty young. He was born in 1789 and then died in 1821, I believe. But you can see the Travis House in Williamsburg. It was built in the 1760s, owned previously by somebody else. Eventually, his dad owned the property. His dad was in local government, and then he took it over before he passed away and passed it on to his heirs, and then eventually it was sold. But the Travis House is in Williamsburg. You can see it in the Colonial Williamsburg area. Don't remember what street it's on. I think it's on right off of Duke of Gloucester Street, if I remember correctly from when I read it earlier. But pretty cool piece of history. It's cool because it's right in the Coast Guard's backyard currently. And 1812, War of 1812, it's something you don't really think about. You think about the U.S. Navy, you think about Fort McHenry, that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's what I got for you, John.
There you go. Number 3 pick, everybody, for this round, Revenue Cutter Surveyor and Captain Samuel Travis. That's really cool that you can go to his house in Williamsburg to this day, because I love going to Williamsburg. So
now I wish I was on the East Coast. I want to go back and see it.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, we wish you were back here. So everyone, that's number 3 choice for Kendrick. My number 3 choice is the U.S. Coast Guard's response to the 1927 Mississippi River flood. This is an amazing response conducted by the United States Coast Guard. This is the most destructive river flood in American history to this day. This is the most destructive one. Obviously, it's this huge catastrophic disaster. 27,000 square miles were flooded from this disaster. It began the summer of 1926. It's caused by heavy rainfall. It lasts into the winter months. So you can imagine there's going to be snow melting and running off and going down the tributaries and into the Mississippi, which causes more flooding. Christmas 1926, the Cumberland River at Nashville, Tennessee, reached 56.2 feet in depth. That's the second highest ever recorded. Flooding continued and spilled over 145 levees on the Mississippi River. So this is just a catastrophic failure of the levee system as well. And this is the 1920s. So they're not like we see today. Obviously, though, levees can still have failure. We still see that. On April 15th, 1927, in 18 hours, 15 inches of rain fell in New Orleans, Louisiana. So that's a lot of rain in 18 hours. And that produces, some terrible things going on in downtown New Orleans. April 29th, so 2 weeks later, a levee 13 miles below New Orleans was intentionally destroyed to protect the city. The flooding affected areas predominantly populated by Black residents. And this leads to even more live streams in the future where we may talk about Black history in New Orleans and how this actually affects them. May 1927, so the next month, the river in Memphis reached 80 miles in width. The river's 80 miles wide now. The flooding is 80 miles wide at Memphis. The Coast Guard is called in to assist because they're known for their life-saving abilities. By the 1920s, they are called in and they rescue a total of 43,853 people. They save 11,313 head of livestock. So they're not only saving people, they're saving livestock because they know commerce. It's gonna affect all that. People need to eat, etc. They transport 72 people in need of hospitalization. So out of those 43,000 people, they are only immediately transferring about 70 to immediate hospitalization. There are a total of 674 Coast Guardsmen and 128 Coast Guard vessels and boats, just regular boats that they find to use in these relief operations, because this is a major event. Use whatever you've got. Think of like Dunkirk. use the local boats. Think of the flooding we have today. You see it on the news all the time where people are taking out fishing boats and finding someone. We're trying to help out. It's the same thing going on here. The event mainly affected Black Americans, who comprised 75% of the population in these low-lying areas. They were 90% of the agricultural workforce. So many times these Coast Guardsmen are helping these people out of these low-lying agricultural areas. Over 600,000 people are forced to relocate due to this. And this is at the time when you have the uptick in the Great Migration. But the weird thing, or the cool thing out of the whole thing, if there is a cool spot out of it, is it does impact the music industry. The Coast Guard goes in and saves all these people, and it saves some people who need to get back on their feet, and they start to talk about what they went through. And obviously you have the Delta Blues and you have blues musicians. They are talking about not only the flood, but being rescued from the flood, almost like Moses coming through and helping them out of the flood. And they remember the Coast Guardsmen who helped them throughout this whole effort. Backwater Blues by Bessie Smith is written in 1927, right as this is happening, right at the height of the flood. She is a very famous singer, and she writes Backwater Blues that same year. Memphis Minnie and Kansas Joe McCoy, 1929, When the Levee Breaks. That may sound familiar because Led Zeppelin remade When the Levee Breaks in 1971. That is a cover song of this event. And Down in the Flood by Bob Dylan, 1967, is about this event. But the Coast Guard, without the Coast Guard coming in and helping these people out, who knows the untold number of people who would have died, because no one could get to some of them, especially when the river at some points is 80 miles wide. The flooding is 80 miles wide. You have 27,000 square miles flooded. Who else really but the Coast Guard could go in there with the proper training to save lives? And we're almost to 100 years ago. So think of what this whole operation would have looked like 100 years ago as compared to today. There's no helicopter operations going on in 1927. This is all by boat. This is all by, landing craft of that era, if you will, to go in and rescue 43,000, almost 44,000 people from the effects of the 1927 Mississippi River flood. So that is my number 3 pick.
That sounds a lot like, something that would happen in 2005.
Right.
Very similar situation. Same demographics. I can picture all the people on the rooftops, in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans during Katrina. I didn't know that about the music. Now I'm interested because I did a whole project in grad school about blues music, and mostly about how it dealt with how they expressed their concerns over racial relations through music. So now I'm interested to look into the music a little bit more in regards to that, because it deals with the Coast Guard a little bit in a way. So
yeah, it really does. And Kojak, who's in my chat here, a Navy man himself, 1927, the same year. There we go. There's an overlap. 1927, the same year. Revenue Marine Captain Samuel Travis, a cutter's named after him. So there's our two.
It was remember it was a $1.25, what they called them, a 125-foot cutter. A lot of them survived into the World War II era, but I remember seeing that in my researching on Samuel Travis.
That's really cool. Ashton, thank you for being here, my friend. You know all about the Mississippi going down there. So yeah, levees tend to not work sometimes. But yeah, that's one of those things where we wanted to. You showed some of the things happening in war. I wanted to show something that happens that we tend to think about with the rescue ops and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
our stories tonight, like you said at the beginning, are a little bit of both, and that's what's really going to help get this grander situation or this grander scenario within people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, like I said, they see the Coast Guard as this one faceted thing, but there's a lot that goes into it. And I mean, the Coast Guard was founded in 1790. It was founded as the Revenue Marine, and it didn't become the United States Coast Guard until 1915. But it's still, and going back to its earliest iterations, it's the oldest continuous seagoing service in the United States military, because Navy ceased to exist for a while until the mid 1790s. The Coast Guard was founded before the Navy was refounded. So, yeah, so there's a lot of things that happen. Oh, and by the way, little plug for our boy Alexander Hamilton. Today is will be 268th birthday, I believe. Father of the United States Coast Guard. Is his birthday today, so perfect timing for this live stream.
Yeah, we timed this right
at the time. So he was credited, or he was tasked with creating these a fleet of revenue cutters. I think there were 10 of them in 1790.
This is the only era in Hamilton's era. That is the only era I ever had anyone in my family join any other branch other than the Army. I had one ancestor who joined the Pennsylvania Navy.
Cool.
And it's like, oh, that must be like a bateau with a swivel gun on the front. And that's about it. That's basically it. We have 10 people watching right now and only 3 votes. Come on, people. Let's get these votes in, and then we can get to round 2. But thank you all for joining us. Joe Ricci is in the chat. Thank you for being here. His dad put in 29 years in the Coast Guard. That's
all
awesome.
Right.
There you go.
All right, shipmate.
There you go. That's awesome. And obviously, my buddy Shores, he's in chat. The cow would be, that is how the cow would react, wouldn't it? Shoresy always coming at me with the jokes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture the Coast Guard and getting all their assets together in 1927 would have been an incredible thing. But the Coast Guard would have been the only service that could have been able to do that with shallow draft vessels. The Navy doesn't have that. And we're going to see in one of your stories how small boat coxswains come in handy during a time of I guess in our country's time of need. So it'll come up again.
Right. Yeah. All right, buddy, I'll give you one more minute to put in your votes, and then we're going to go into round 2. We have 4 votes in right now. We have 10 of us watching. Please vote early, vote often. And then we'll get to round 2. We'll get our number 2 picks in.
I found my list, John. I know what my number 2 and number 1 were. I remember the order now.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Joe is back in chat, I think. There we go. Is there a certain mention of rum runners?
No, I think that was our only time that we mentioned Coast Guard in the 1920s. My step grandmother's father was an officer in the Coast Guard during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and he was involved in that. And was also involved in the Greenland Patrol in World War II, which is something we won't talk about. But if you're interested in naval warfare, especially our early military involvement in the Atlantic Theater, Greenland Patrol was like one of the first, and the Coast Guard had all of the icebreakers and the ability to go that far north. So a lot of Coast Guard cutters were involved in that. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, check it out. Greenland Patrol. It's a pretty cool story.
Well, in other news, we tied on the poll, so it is a tie. It is a draw for round 1. So we'll go into round 2 now, and we are going to do Kendrick's number 2 pick. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay, so for number 2, I have Forrest Rednauer and the SS Dorchester. A lot of people might be familiar with the SS Dorchester story. I'll preface by saying, if you've heard of the four chaplains, I think it was four or five chaplains, Army chaplains that went down with the Dorchester, they gave up their life jackets. That's this same boat. This is a story related to that, that obviously doesn't get as much press. So we'll start a little bit about Forrest Redenauer. He's from Cutler, Illinois. Was born May 13th, 1923. He enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1941 before the war broke out in June of 1941. In 1943, pre-dawn darkness of 1943, this is February 3rd, he was wearing a rubber suit to ward off hypothermia. He was on the Coast Guard cutter Escanaba. They voluntarily subjected themselves to the stormy seas and the bitter cold of the North Atlantic. And they, for nearly 4 hours, were trying to rescue survivors of the torpedoed Dorchester. They knew the dangers. They could be crushed between life rafts, up against the side of the ships in the surf, being struck by a propeller blade, or as we call it in the seagoing service, the screws. If the engine's backed, you never know what could happen. The Escanaba prevented many floating survivors from being caught in that suction, and they were able to save many people that day. I'm not sure exactly what the whole number of people that were rescued during the Dorchester. Yeah, by the way, it was 4 chaplains. There were 230 survivors that made it. Originally, the ship sank with 674 of the 904 on board. And then 230 survivors were rescued mostly by the Coast Guard, the USCGC Escanaba. And so, but what's amazing about Forrest Redenauer, he was a ship's cook. He was not a lifesaver. He was not like a rescue swimmer or anything of that sort. These were people that just went and did what they had to do. What they say about in the Marines, you're a rifleman first before you do your job. The Coast Guard's a mindset of you save what you can, you save who you can save at that moment. And the reason why Forrest Redenauer got the most credit is that while I don't know the exact number, and that exact number is never really mentioned, they do know that he accounted for the most lives saved during that incident. And the only reason he had to quit is because his rubber suit became torn. And then it became, and that's the other thing that they teach us, is that it's important to save others, but sometimes you have to save yourself, and it's not worth the risk of you getting yourself into a situation. And they teach us this now in the Coast Guard. It's not worth it to put yourself into a situation where you also have to be rescued. So you say what you can do, and then you get out. So he survives that incident. Unfortunately, the Escanaba was disintegrated in a massive explosion. They don't know what caused it. It was off of Greenland in June of 1943. So 4 months later, almost 3 months later, exactly. Or actually, it was just over 3 months later. The Escanaba exploded, and they lost 101 out of 103 men. Forrest Redenauer's namesake, before anybody else jumps in the chat with it, he now is the namesake of a fast response cutter that is 154 foot, and it's currently moored up in Los Angeles, so not too far north of where I am right now. And for you, Kojak, I know you're in the chat. There was also a naval vessel called the USS Forrest Redenauer as well. the USS Red DE 592. It was a high-speed transport, and it was used from 1944 to 1946. It was a destroyer escort, and then got converted to a high-speed transport. There's also the United States Coast Guard also has the Forrest Rednauer Memorial Award Program for excellence in food service, because he was a ship's cook. And also the dining hall in Yorktown is called Rednauer Hall. So Coast Guard, and also the Escanaba. The Escanaba is still a cutter in use today, and that's the way the Coast Guard works. They love legacy naming. They rename their cutters all the time. So you will see names reused a lot, and that's to keep the Coast Guard history and legacy alive. So there is a Coast Guard cutter, Escanaba. It's in Portsmouth, Virginia. It's a 270-foot medium endurance cutter.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. I don't know if I can top that one, but that's a great story. I like that. And he gave a nod to Kojak too, so he'll like that.
Yeah, I always got to do a nod to our squids in the audience.
Yeah, I know who he's voting for in this round. All right, time for my number 2 pick in the list here. I'm going to go a little bit different. We're going to go back in history, like Kendrick did on round 1. I'm going to do this on round 2 this time, and this time we are going back to the one, the only Ida Lewis. If you are into basically, how should I say? If you're into powerful women, Ida Lewis is your lady. You've heard of the unsinkable Molly Brown on the Titanic and stuff like that. Ida Lewis would have saved Molly Brown. Okay, so this woman is amazing. She was once coined the bravest woman in America, and she served as the official lighthouse keeper for the U.S. Lighthouse Service, which is later a part of the Coast Guard, taken into the Coast Guard. Ida was born in Newport, Rhode Island in 1842, which is a great place to be born when you are going to be doing this kind of work. Her father is Captain Hosea Lewis, and he was once part of the Revenue Marine and transferred to the Lighthouse Service. In 1854, his duty station became Lime Rock Light Station, located on the island of Lime Rock, just off the coast of Newport. The family themselves moved to the island 3 years later, 1857. However, 4 months after moving to the island, Captain Lewis suffers a stroke, and he is basically out of action. He can't do anything. It's a long recuperation. His term is pretty much done officially, but he has help. And Ida took over more of the household duties and also tending the light in the lighthouse. And tending the light meant that you fill the lamp with oil at sundown and at midnight. You manage the wick of the light. You remove the carbon off of the reflectors of the light, and you put the light out at sunrise. So Ida's in charge of doing that every single night, 7 days a week. That's her job that she takes on top of all her duties at home that she has with the family. By the time that this occurs, Ida is known as also a fantastic swimmer and a boater. So she has all this experience because this is an island. She actually rows her siblings to school every day. So she understands how to use a boat and how to turn on a dime and give you 8 cents change. In other words, she can really maneuver a boat around. Her first rescue was in 1854 at the age of 12. She saved 4 men who had their boat capsize close to the island. She is most famous for her rescue on March 29th, 1869, during a snowstorm in Newport Harbor. Sergeant James Adams and Private John McLaughlin were in a small boat guided by a 14-year-old boy when the boat overturned. Now, these men were from Fort Adams, which is right down the road from Newport, like just stone's throw away. The 2 soldiers managed to cling to the boat for dear life, but the boy lost his battle with the cold water and passed away. Ida was alerted by her mother, who saw the men in the water. So Ida ran to the boat, and with the help of her younger brother, they saved the two soldiers, hauling them into the boat, bringing them to the lighthouse. And she did this all without putting on a coat or shoes. Okay, so this is a very strong young lady. Ida serves at this lighthouse, the same lighthouse, with her family for 54 years. So for 54 years, she's in charge of lighting the lamp and keeping the waters around it safe. She reportedly saved the lives of 18 people officially, according to Coast Guard records. Unofficial accounts double that and say 36. So we have the official, we have the unofficial. So it's kind of up to you which way you want to go with this. She met President Ulysses S. Grant. She met with General William Tecumseh Sherman and Admiral Dewey. So she's pretty well known in circles in Newport. Remember, this is the height of Newport society, too. So there's a lot of high stakes people coming in and out of Newport at this time. Remember, there's all those mansions up there and all kinds of stuff going on. Elizabeth Cady Stanton stops by. She's one of the leaders of the women's suffrage movement. And she is going to stop by because to her, Ida Lewis is the quintessential strong woman, taking over the duties and doing what someone else can't do, and being a strong force to be reckoned with. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton embraces her for this. It's said that her father was quite amused that all these people were stopping around to see his daughter. Sometimes they would get 100 people a day that would stop by the island just to see Ida. So she has a short marriage. I believe her marriage only lasts like 2 years. And then she leaves and comes back to the lighthouse. And she doesn't, well, she leaves the guy and says, the heck with this, I'm going to stay single. And she basically stays to herself with her family. Her last rescue was at the age of 63. So that's an old person at this time. We're getting up there. She died of a stroke in 1911 at the age of 69. So only 6 years later, she's passed on. She was the first woman to have a road named after her in Arlington National Cemetery. Lewis Drive is named after Ida Lewis. So that is my number 2 pick. And obviously I didn't get to go over everything about her because it would take up another half hour, but she's quite the lady, and a very spunky lady and a very strong-willed woman. And I admire her for that. So Ida takes the number 2 position on my list.
Yeah. So this is, if for anybody who's not familiar with the timeline of Coast Guard history, this Ida Lewis would be a part of the U.S. Lighthouse Service, which doesn't become a part of the Coast Guard until 1930 or 31. But they play a major role. I love lighthouses. Lighthouses are like a guilty pleasure of mine.
Yeah.
If you want to call it guilty, I don't call it guilty, but to some people it might be. But I got to take pictures of lighthouses, go in them, take selfies with them whenever I see them. But here's the thing. Lighthouses play a major role, obviously, to keep mariners safe. But then when she was saving lives, the life-saving service, got to make a plug for that person who commented on the Facebook post about the life-saving service. That wasn't official until the 1870s. So prior to that, you had volunteers that would be lifesavers, life-saving service, but they wasn't an official government entity until later in into the 1870s. So and becomes even more standardized by the late 1880s into the 1890s. So your lighthouse keepers played multiple roles back then, lifesavers and also lighthouse keepers. And keep in mind, when John about these people tending the light, they're climbing these stairs, 300 foot, whatever it may be, up into the light room. And they're carrying these pails of oil, which is not light, up and down these stairs. So I know John and John and I are both fans of very strong women, as we're both married to very strong women.
That's right.
But I will plug some other great female Coast Guard members if you're interested. Like Ida Lewis, there's Catherine Walker, who was a German-American lighthouse keeper. She didn't even speak a lick of English. And she was in New Jersey during around the same time. Her life was 1848 to 1931. I also like the story of Myrtle Hazard. John, you'll like this because it's World War I. Myrtle Hazard was a electrician and radio operator in the United States Coast Guard, not the SPARS, not some women's auxiliary. She was actually in the United States Coast Guard.
Wow.
And she wore a modified men's uniform since there was no official women's uniform. And this was in 1917. And she has a cutter named after her. Catherine Walker and Ida Lewis both have cutters named after him. Now, what's kind of cool is Ida Lewis and Catherine Walker's cutters are buoy tenders, and they're called keeper class cutters. They're all named after lighthouse keepers. They're 175-foot coastal buoy tenders. Myrtle Hazard and some of the other women also have some cutters named after them. They're also fast response cutters, those 154-foot ones like the Forrest Redenauer. Names like Myrtle Hazard, Angela McShann, who was an African-American yeoman. My dad served at the same time she did. I think she was the first chief, African-American woman chief in the United States Coast Guard. And I might be wrong, might be higher, might be senior chief or master chief, but at least chief. There's a lot of, if you look up namesakes for fast response cutters and the keeper class and look for women's names, Google them. They always have an amazing story behind them or something cool. And the Coast Guard is definitely a great place to learn about women's history. I mean, we had to know Myrtle Hazard's name. We had to know Ida Lewis's name when we were in boot camp. That was part of required knowledge. Awesome. And it's amazing. The auditorium at Training Center Cape May is named after Ida Lewis. Also, when I was at Cape May, the CO was a female captain. The commandant of the Coast Guard right now is a female. And that's Admiral Fagan. Great role models for young ladies out there for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I do want to point out Kojak always has the little tidbits we miss. She was making $750 a year. That's a ton of money at that time. Highest paid lighthouse keeper in service. Wow. That's crazy. $750 is a lot of money back then. All right. So it is time, my friends. It is time to go to our final pick. Poll is 67-33, and Ida won that round. I stopped using names. I'm just going to use the stories because it's not about us. It's about the stories. And so Ida took that round, but
yeah, as she should. I mean, she's an amazing character in Coast Guard history for sure.
She is. I would have, if I was single back in the day, I would have hit on her. But that's, I'm just keeping it real. So it is time for our number one picks. Kendrick, obviously you know which one it is.
Yep.
I'm going to actually do one thing right here real quick. And there we go. And we are ready, my friend. Go ahead.
Okay, so number one, I am talking about Coast Guard Squadron 1 and the Point Comfort incident of 1966. So now we're going into the Vietnam conflict. The Coast Guard during Vietnam, one of those things you, once again, don't hear about. But there are some really great stories that come out of Vietnam with the Coast Guard. And this one is, there's a lot of convoluted details going into what Coast Guard Squadron 1 is, why they were there, what they were a part of, what happened to the Point Comfort. So this one I'll try and shorten as much as possible, but it's hard to talk about in a short amount of time. So Coast Guard Squadron 1 was active from 1965, May of 1965 to August of 1970. It was placed under the operational control of the Navy. Now, that doesn't seem crazy because the Coast Guard does go under the Department of the Navy during times of war. But as we know, Vietnam is not a time of war. It is just a conflict. We did not officially declare war. And it was assigned to duties in Operation Market Time. And I'll come back to explain what that is in a second. But I want to go back to Squadron 1 for a second. So 26 Point class cutters. These are 82-foot cutters that were used up into the 90s. These Point class cutters were used by the U.S. Coast Guard before they were taken over by the 87-foot Island class cutters that are still in active service today. And what they were doing was their crews were supporting Navy actions, interdicting the movement of arms and supplies from the South China Sea into South Vietnam by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. You may have heard of trawlers or what they call junk or trawler operators. These are like those small craft that you'll see if you watch any documentaries on Vietnam or a Vietnam War movie or something, any of those little boats. So Vietnamese are using those to smuggle weapons, and kind of like, I guess this is more of the maritime version of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So the Coast Guard was active in trying to help the Navy interdict that. So that's something the Coast Guard is very used to, the word interdiction, for sure. There were about 3,000 Coast Guardsmen that were involved in this almost 6 years of operations. Now, Operation Market Time it began in 1965, and it was literally the operation for interdicting the flow of troops, war material, supplies by sea, coast, and rivers. So very large area of operation, AOR. So we're talking pretty much the entire coast of Vietnam, plus all the major rivers that go into it. Now we'll go to the Point Comfort incident itself. The Point Comfort was a did I say Point Comfort? I mean Point Welcome. Did I put Point? I mean put Point Comfort. That is a mistype. It's supposed to be U.S. Coast Guard cutter Point. Maybe we can make that quick change.
Which one is it?
It's the Point Welcome.
Oh, the Point Welcome. Okay, the Point Welcome incident.
Not Point Comfort. Point Welcome.
I got you.
Yeah. So the Point Welcome incident. This is in 1966, August 11th. This is about 3:40 in the morning. The cutter was illuminated by a U.S. Air Force forward air controller and mistook it for an enemy vessel. Now, that sounds kind of crazy. How would they not know it's an American vessel? I will explain how that occurred and how this will never happen again, because it's one of those situations where military communication seems to fail, and there's no clear communication between different factions as part of this operation. So a B-57 Canberra tactical bomber and two F-4 Phantom fighter bomber aircraft proceeded to strafe the cutter for an hour, each making 7 to 9 passes. The Point Welcome turned on all of her running and docking lights when first illuminated, so that they tried to contact them by radio to let them know, hey, we're friendly. We're United States Coast Guard. We're not an enemy vessel. During one of the first passes, all the crew on the bridge were wounded, including the commanding officer, Lieutenant Junior Grade David Brostrom. And he was killed, actually, along with the helmsman, Engineman Second Class Jerry Phillips. All the signaling equipment, electronics, and radios were knocked out on that first pass. So this is already starting to be a bad day. Point Welcome began evasive maneuvers at the direction of Chief Mate Richard Patterson. He assumed command after the XO, the executive officer, was injured. Patterson attempted to avoid illumination lights of the attacking aircraft by moving out away of the strafing aircraft fire. At 4:15, this is about 45 minutes later, Patterson decided that the best course of action was to beach the cutter and move the wounded ashore. However, when this was attempted, the crew came under fire from unknown sources from the shoreline. We're not sure if this is North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, or if this is U.S. troops. At 4:25, about 10 minutes later, Point Orient and the U.S. Coast Guard Point Caution arrived on the scene and started the rescue proceedings. In addition to the killing officer, 1 other crewman was killed and 9 other crewmen were injured, along with a Republic of Vietnam liaison officer and a civilian freelance journalist named Tim Page. They were injured. They were not killed. The bridge of the cutter was severely damaged, and despite 5 to 9 inches wide holes on the main deck, the hull was undamaged. Point Welcome was escorted back to Da Nang and under her own power required 3 months to repair the damage. Richard Patterson saved the cutter and the surviving crew at great risk to himself. He was awarded the Bronze Star with Combat V device. After 8 days of findings of testimony, the findings of a board of investigation conducted were forwarded to the Commandant of the Coast Guard. And this is what it said in a letter, an extract from a letter from November 9th, 1966, to the Commandant of the Coast Guard. It is evident from the record that there was a lack of communication between different forces operating in the same area, that existing orders and instructions pertaining to identification and recognition of friendly forces were not observed. As a result of the investigation, lines of communication were set up between the Navy and the Air Force. This was not happening at the time of this incident. The Air Force knew nothing of Operation Market Time and did not routinely communicate with naval forces. To avoid repetition of the incident, aircraft patrolling near the DMZ were instructed not to attack vessels without first contacting the command in Da Nang for clearance, which probably a very good idea. Now, Chief Bosun Mate, or as I would say, I would just call him Chief Patterson. He served in the Coast Guard. Unfortunately, he's deceased, died back in 2010. But in his legacy, there is a recreation center named after him in Training Center, Petaluma, California. And in 2007, he was inducted into the Navy Surface Navy Hall of Fame. And in 2010, MCPOG, Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Skip Bowen, proposed that all 58 Sentinel-class cutters should be named after enlisted sailors in the Coast Guard who were recognized for heroism. Patterson was to have the namesake of the 17th cutter, and it was named after Master Chief Donald Horsley instead. So I do not believe he has a cutter named after him, but the Sentinel-class cutters, which are those 154 fast response cutters, I believe that Richard Patterson should have one named after him for his actions. This is a great example of, here's the Coast Guard during wartime, but here's also a time where he had to save lives. This is when being a great bosun's mate, the type that what I'm training to be now, and building my craft. This is what I hope one day to become, somebody like him, who's able to, under, rough conditions, be able to maneuver my vessel to safe haven and save the lives of others. It's a remarkable story. There's other stories about the Point class cutters during Vietnam. One name I'll plug is Heriberto Hernandez. He during Vietnam, look up that story. He was killed during Vietnam. He's on the wall in DC. But there's a lot that we don't know about or don't talk about with the Coast Guard during Vietnam, and this is just one of those stories.
Wow. I can't imagine all that strafing run going on. And it's just, that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they're under fire by their own people, and there's no way that they can contact them because the radios are out.
Right.
And they just got to do what they got to do, and hopefully find a way for somebody to get in contact with the Air Force.
Wow.
It's crazy to me that there was no communication lines, like that not everybody in that area of operations knew that this operation was happening. It was just a Navy and Coast Guard operation, but for some reason the Air Force was not informed about it or briefed about it. And yeah.
Wow. There you go. The cutter was transferred to Vietnam Navy in 70. Huh.
Yep. Thank you, Kojak. I was going to look up the cutter to see where it was afterwards, but yes, not the Point Comfort. It is the
that's fine.
Yeah.
we changed it. We got it. We got it good.
Oh, you did change it? I didn't even
yeah. We're good. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I got it. I got it good here. So we got Point Welcome in both slides there. So we are good to go.
Yeah, those Kojak mentioned the Royal Australian Navy. That's where the Canberra bombers come in. Those were
right. Yeah. Well, we're going from the Vietnam War to one other war for our number one pick here. So both of us are talking about conflict here on a massive scale. And this one is my pick because far too often we forget these guys were even there. And they were there. And they were there in quite a large amount. I'm going to try to share a photo real quick if I can with everyone. Here we go.
Yes, the jaws of death.
If you know this photo.
Yeah.
This was taken by a Coast Guard photographer. If you know this photo, everybody should know this photo. Okay. This was taken by, I brought slides. This is taken by a Coast Guard photographer, everybody. You need to know about these cats. These are the guys that I'm choosing for number one, Operation Neptune. Guys that are consistently forgotten about. And I think we really need to remember this part of it. Just before D-Day, 1944, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt comes up with the idea that really we're going to have this massive undertaking going into Fortress Europe. We should have a rescue flotilla just in case, because we know people are going to get wounded. People are going to need to be taken out of the area of operations. So we need to have a rescue flotilla. The Coast Guard utilized 83-foot patrol boats known as the Matchbox Fleet for anti-submarine operations along the east coast of the United States. Remember, if you're anywhere along the east coast, like from, a lot of you from North Carolina, Massachusetts, the Maritimes in Canada, there's a lot of U-boat action going on out there, outside of Florida. So they're taking these ships and they're transporting them on freighters to the UK, and they offload them, they modify them to serve as rescue vessels. This is Rescue Flotilla 1, and they are based in Poole, England, Poole. They're under the command of Commander Alexander Stewart, USCGR. 30 of the rescue craft are assigned to the British and Canadian sectors. 30 are assigned to the American sectors. So it's a 50-50 split. Rescue boats from Flotilla 1 rescued almost 500 individuals on D-Day alone. And by the time the unit was shut down in December of 1944, they lasted that long, 6 months approximately. The boats had rescued 1,438 people. They rescued 194 at Omaha Beach, just off the beach, 157 just off of Utah Beach, and 133 off of Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches combined. So you're looking at, we're approaching that 500 number pretty quickly. The CGC-16 was nicknamed the homing pigeon, which I love that name. It arrived off the beachhead before the invasion even started and started rescuing survivors from damaged landing craft in the gathering area at 5:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944. During the morning, the crew of the vessel rescued 90 soldiers and sailors from the water. By the end of the day, they had pulled 126 men from the English Channel, the largest number saved by any of the Coast Guard Matchbox fleet craft on June 6, 1944. In the British and Canadian sectors, there was some tense moments when trying to incorporate United States Coast Guard ships and vessels, I should say, into the operations. The HMS Hind nearly opened fire on one of the 83-foot craft when they attempted to join the convoy. They thought they were being attacked, and they decided they were going to open fire, but they were stopped at the last minute. The CGC-24 stood by the HMS Albatross for 2 days and acted as a courier, including, quote, fetching an officer's pipe and transporting personnel. They have no idea what to do with some of these guys. However, there were a few in the British fleet who did understand how to use them. The CGC-35 navigated the channel to assist 24 Royal Navy LCIs, the landing craft, and accompanied the first wave to the Sword landing at 7:40 in the morning on June 6th. CGC-34 pulled 32 British servicemen from the channel on D-Day alone. The Coast Guard lost 15 of its ranks during the invasion on the first day. They suffered more losses of ships in the days around D-Day than at any other point in Coast Guard history. 4 landing craft were destroyed on the beaches, and an additional 85 vessels sank offshore. But don't think that D-Day is one and done for the Coast Guard in the Second World War as far as landings are concerned. They had been landing in the Pacific with troops of the U.S. Army and United States Marine Corps. They were there for the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. So D-Day isn't a one-off of like FDR's idea of, oh, we're going to take the Coast Guard out and do all this. They've been doing it for a while, and they've been helping out with landing crafts and LCIs, and which they called lousy civilian ideas, is what they called LCIs. And then you had your Matchbox fleet doing all kinds of patrols in every area of operation in some form or fashion, and scooping people out of the water. So for me, my number one pick is Operation Neptune, June 6, 1944.
And you know why they were called the Matchbox Fleet, right, John?
Tell us why.
Because they're wooden hulled boats.
That's right.
Can you imagine that?
That's right.
Can you imagine that going into Operation Neptune? We all hear the stories about how D-Day was, and you're going in there with a wooden hulled boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
no armor. Insane. You don't need armor.
No.
It's going back to what we started with your 1812 story.
Exactly. I mean, and as my shipmates would say now, we do a lot with few. We don't have the big budget like the other services, so we do with what we can.
There you go.
So that's just another amazing story of I'm glad you plugged the other landings too, because I know Ashton's in our resident Marine in the chat. Obviously, I wanted to avoid some of the more well-known stories. So obviously the Coast Guard only has one Medal of Honor recipient, and that was Douglas Monroe saving Marines from a beachhead in Guadalcanal. It's always a good story, but it's one that people may have heard of. So I wanted to avoid that story. Just like maybe if anybody's ever seen the movie The Finest Hours, like Bernard Weber,
right?
That's another story that at least is in the mainstream a little bit. And then little lesser known one that I also avoided was that the U.S. revenue cutter Harriet Lane, she fired the first naval shot of the Civil War. Also unique because it's named after a woman. It's, you know,
Yeah.
but it's what was it? President Buchanan's niece, I think, or something was who Harriet Lane
Something
was.
like that. Yeah.
Something something related to Harriet or to President Buchanan.
Yeah.
And once again, another namesake, the Harriet Lane still exists in the Coast Guard today. It's in 270 out of Portsmouth, Virginia.
Wow. That's
So
awesome.
you always the names you'll see around. There's many iterations of the same name in different eras of the Coast Guard.
That's awesome. Everybody, go in the chat and put the last poll question up for our vote for tonight. I know we're running over, and some of you have been with us for a while. There are still 7 of you in here, so please pay attention to the poll, our last poll of the evening, and then we are going to wrap things up here in a few moments. But yeah, there's so many stories that we don't have the time.
Yeah,
It was a hard thing for me to think of. I went with my obvious number 1 choice, but 2 and 3 were like I could go any direction with this.
there's so many. Obviously, the history's long. People, may think of the Coast Guard more in a modern sense, but not so much in some of these other conflicts, especially World War II. They're under the Department of the Navy. They're wearing the same uniform as the Navy.
Mhm.
They don't have their white halls yet. The white halls don't come until in Vietnam. Or in the modern sense of the white hall that we see today. So like the Coast Guard doesn't stand out, but they do have a very interesting story. I think Coast Guard during World War II and Vietnam are two of my favorite things to look at, just because of how they were involved, and World War I as well. They were used in a lesser sense during the Civil War, but sometimes you'll see revenue cutters thrown in some of those fleets of naval vessels,
Right.
because they didn't have those ironclad ships. They were still sailing the wooden sailing boats. So, but yeah, it's a very very long history. I'm glad to be a part of it, and obviously we're making our own history now. So,
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on here and wanting to be a part of this, because you're the one who came up with the idea. And I was like, yeah, let's do this, because I haven't seen our live stream perform this before in this manner.
No.
So let's see about doing that, because we could do the
nobody
top
talks
3
about
of
Coast Guard history. We're the I guess we're the redheaded stepchild of the military. Well, maybe that might be the Space Force now, but
it's probably the Space Force.
We still are, because we were thinking, oh, the Space Force is now in. Maybe our flag won't be last in the. No, we're still last, because they put the Space Force next to the Air Force.
Sorry, Space Force, you have the worst uniforms too. I've as a material culture guy, I'm kind of like,
yeah. Well, any
terrible.
old coasties that would maybe listen to this, maybe during Kojak's time, the coasties used to like to call their uniforms the bus driver uniforms. They look slightly like they do today, but it's a little bit different. We're less bus drivery now. We don't look like Ralph Cramden. So
no Ralph Cramden.
No Ralph Cramden.
All right, everybody. 3 votes are in. Neptune got 2.
I figured.
Got 1.
Yeah, I mean,
people love
Neptune's hard to top.
Yeah,
you can't go wrong with World War II.
Yeah, it's just the thing. It tends to win the votes. I don't know what it is, but people tend to ask me for more World War II content and American Civil War content, and I'm like, I've done a lot of Civil War content. Let's do some more stuff. So when we do things like this, though, that really helps a great deal. When we do like top 3 of something people don't usually think about, but it needs to have be out in the limelight, and be shown and get this stuff showcased out there. So a lot of people never heard of Ida Lewis. A lot of people never heard of Samuel Travis, and it rolls down from there, and it's up to us to be able to do that.
And one more thing, Kojak mentioned a U.S. Navy vessel manned by a Coast Guard that happened during World War II. Family friend of ours that we called Uncle. His name was Phil Bargelt. He was on the USS Orange, which was a Navy vessel that was manned all by coasties. and he was on that during World War II. He was in the Coast Guard, and he was in the South Pacific. And I have a little journal that he kept during his time, talking about, shooting down a plane here and there, going on mine, or submarine hunts and things like that. They were down in like New Guinea area of the South Pacific. And it was a very cool thing. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2008. I didn't get to ask him many questions, but he was definitely an old salty guy, for sure. Just like had the typical sailor mouth of any old sailor from that time period. Took his pills with beer.
Yep.
That type of guy. I mean, the guy had like a stomach of iron, and he had to be in a tin can like that in the back in World War II in that time period. But yeah, it was cool learning a little bit about what I could, even though he passed away when I was 15. And that was like the only person I ever really got to meet in person that was in Coast Guard during World War II.
Wow.
And but yeah, there's a lot of stories out there, not only Neptune, but if you look at the D-Day landings, like that Jaws of Death photo that John shared that has the combat photographer. There's a lot of Coast Guard combat photographers during World War II.
Yeah.
A little plug here, just in case if they end up seeing it, the Night Cappers that are on Facebook. It's a pretty cool. I'm going to put it in. I think it's spelled like this. Put it in the chat. Or it might be Night Cappers.
Oh, there you go.
Remember, if you look either one of those two up on Facebook, you're going to find it. They post a lot of old photos from World War II, and they have an album on their page that's all dedicated to the Coast Guard during World War II. And there's some neat photos in there, including a combat photographer, some African Americans that were served in the Coast Guard during World War II, beach patrols with German Shepherds, like that sort of stuff. Very cool stuff. Definitely want to plug what they do because I've been following it. They started posting. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Kendrick, thank you for coming on tonight and giving us your top 3 lists. Really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad we'd be able to talk. I love being able to talk Coast Guard at any time. So this has been great, and it's definitely been your top 3 topics have been really cool. And I'm glad to be a part of that. So,
thank you.
Definitely unique.
I appreciate that. So when you maybe later on this year we'll do top 3 Mexican dishes since you're out there eating that good Mexican food.
There we go.
I can hear all.
We might have to have Steve Fan come on. Like a trio, and do maybe do like Mexican and like Asian dishes.
Yeah,
I could find plenty of that out here too.
We'll do top 3 fusions. Yeah.
There we go.
There it is. Everybody, thank you so much for being with Kendrick and I tonight. We really appreciate you tuning in and being a part of the chat and hanging out and voting and just being here. And this sense of community has always been huge for me, and the positivity that we get from this community has been huge to me and everyone who comes on. It's been helpful to them as well to get through some very trying times and to get our minds off some things. So thank you to everyone who has stopped by to hear more about top 3 U.S. Coast Guard stories or any other of the top 3 things we've done. We hope you've appreciated it and enjoyed it and got something of value out of it. If you haven't already slapped that subscribe button, please slap that subscribe button and check me out on all the other platforms. Kendrick, thank you again, my man. I appreciate you.
Yep. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you sometime soon when I make it back to the East Coast.
Yeah, we'll go to Sheets.
Yes, I'll need that.
There you go. Hey, not a sponsor yet.
It'll happen.
It'll happen. Take care, everybody. Have a great night. Be safe. Be well.